Right, good afternoon everyone, and thank you for joining us on our Spring14 release webinar. I'm Keir Bowden, CTO at BrightGen. I'm joined by Clive Platt, our Service Manager. And here's the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to be covering the new features of the Spring14 release, some enhancements to Salesforce1, as usual, some chatter enhancements. It wouldn't be a Salesforce release without those. A couple of forecasting changes to tell you about, some new functionality in this release regarding orders, and then some smaller pieces, repeat tasks, some analytics changes, and a few platform enhancements. Then I'll talk a little bit about the Elevate London workshop that's taking place in London later on in March, and then finally I'll hand over to Clive for the Q&A session. So on to the main feature of this webinar, the Spring14 release of Salesforce. So first up, we've got some new features in the Salesforce1 Mobile application. For those of you who haven't seen or used this application, this was launched at Dreamforce. It was a relatively early version that was launched at Dreamforce, so there's been some additional enhancements added to that as part of this release. Probably the major one for us is that you can now access Salesforce communities through Salesforce1. Unfortunately, you can't access them through the installed iOS or Android devices. It's supported for the HTML5 application version only. So what that means is you have to access it through the mobile device browser. You have to log in with the user ID and password because there's no concept of being able to store credentials, etc., like you can on an installed application. There's a small amount of branding available. Basically, you can customize the splash image that's displayed when the application first starts up, and you can also change the color of the bar across the top of the screen. And you can access this by adding /1/1.app to the URL of the community. So next, there's been some changes to the Salesforce notifications, and this is for the installed app only because there's no concept of notifications in the HTML5 version. And for those who aren't familiar, there are two types of notifications. So the first type is push notifications. Now these appear in the status bar at the top of the phone outside of the application. So this is the kind of, for those of you that use things like Twitter and Facebook, if you're not running the application but something happens, you receive a notification at the top of the screen. And then we have in-app notification. So these are displayed inside the application and they're accessible by clicking a bell icon at the top right of the screen. And when there are notifications waiting for you, the bell icon will be displayed in red. So the changes to notifications are as follows. When a task is assigned to you, you'll receive an in-app and a push notification. So that's completely new. In Winter 14, profile posts and comments on posts caused an in-app notification. And in this release, you'll also receive a push notification when this happens. All of the notification types that are supported for the internal application are now supported for communities. So any posts on your profile, your community profile, any comments on posts in the community will be notified through Salesforce1. And finally, for iOS devices only, so for iPad and iPhone, you can configure whether to display full or minimal content with the notification. Now, the default is minimal notification, and this just contains the name of the user and the event. So it'll be something like Clive Platt mentioned you. If you have full content, on the other hand, now that can contain full details of the mention or the post. So it'll say Clive Platt mentioned you and said that you have the webinar this afternoon, so make sure that's in your diary, for example. Now, something to be aware of if you're considering using full notifications is that the notifications are actually sent via a third-party service. So Apple, in this case, provide the notification service. So what that means is there's any sensitive information that appears in the full body of the notification that will be sent and available decrypted on a third-party site. So if there's any concerns in your organization about sensitive information of this nature, it's best to leave the notification setting at minimal at the default. So the groups functionality in Salesforce1 has been enhanced. You can create groups or group members directly from the group page using publisher actions. You can edit the group details directly from the device, whereas before you had to go to the full UI. And finally, you can view announcements, which are a new chatter group feature, which we'll be covering in more detail in the chatter section. So here's some screenshots of the new groups functionality. So The announcement is displayed near the top of the page, just under the highlights section with the little megaphone there. And then if I click on the button, the plus button to open the publisher actions, then I've got two new publisher actions there of new group and new group member. Another change, files can now be previewed directly in the chatter feed of the Salesforce1 application. So what used to happen was you could see there was a file waiting for you, but you had to download it before you could see if it was something you're actually interested in looking at. So what you can now do is preview these. So in the screenshot here, I'm creating a picture, a post which is going to include a screenshot of a rather fine organisation diagram that I've put together. And once I post this to the feed, anyone who receives the post in their feed will see a preview of the image rather than a link to download it. And that's probably, looking at that picture, the last time they'll consider looking at it. So next we have some chatter enhancements. As is pretty common with these releases, there's been a number of changes to chatter, except I've left the title as Salesforce1. I apologise for that. So first on the chatter side of things, we have some changes to topics. So topics are effectively a way of tagging posts to indicate that it's on a particular subject. And now you can endorse people for topics, which is a good way to identify people who are experts in a particular area. So you have the concept of having a chatter group that you might be able to post to because you know they're experts. But another way of finding out who the experts are, they can be endorsed on the topics. Anyone who is endorsed receives an email notification that that's happened, and they can configure that on an individual basis via their chatter notification settings. And when you access a topics page, the top 3 experts, the top 3 most knowledgeable people, are displayed with a link to go and view the rest of the knowledgeable people. And finally, anyone who is included in the knowledgeable people list but doesn't want to be, because it's maybe drilling into a bit too much into their time, answering questions from people who think they're the expert, then they can opt out simply by clicking the Hide Me button that's displayed under their name when they view themselves in the knowledgeable people list. So the endorsement flow is, when you open a topics page, there is a list of knowledgeable people displayed, which may be empty if no one has been endorsed as yet. And at the bottom, there's an endorse people link. So clicking on this link opens the endorse people page. And much like adding people to a group or following people, it's a simple search box. Allows you to search for individuals, and then you endorse them by clicking the little endorse link on the bottom right. And that then adds the user to the list of knowledgeable people. So you can see their admin user has been endorsed and appears as the #1 knowledgeable person about Salesforce1. So next we have something that we've been asked about several times over the years. So I'm hoping this is going to make a few people happy. And this is branding of the chatter email notifications. So you can change the name of the sender and the email address that the email is sent from, which aren't particularly exciting, but I mean, they're helpful. But more importantly, you can change the footer text and the footer image. So here's a screenshot of an email notification sent from Chatter in Winter 14. And you can see down the bottom, Salesforce.com Inc., the Landmark 1 Market Suite. So there's nothing in there that says this is anything to do with BrightGen. You have to look at the context of the message to figure that out. So in the Spring14 version, what you can see here is that I've changed the text and the image to be BrightGen specific. So there's no more mention of Salesforce in there, especially if I change the sender name and the sender email address. Okay. Another chatter enhancement, you can now send an email to create a post in a chatter group. This has to be enabled through the chatter email settings page. And once this is enabled, a post by email link will appear at the bottom on the group detail page. So if you click on the post by email, that'll open your email client and allow you to write the post. You're limited to 5,000 characters, and the subject and any attachments will not appear in the post. It's only the body of the email. And then if you save that email address as a contact in your client, then you can post to a group from wherever you happen to be. And I can see that being useful if you're in a kind of patchy bandwidth area and it's difficult to fire up the full Salesforce1 application and navigate through the groups, etc. And finally on Chatter, we have group announcements, which we touched on the Salesforce1 section. So this is from an idea on the Salesforce success community. So another good example of Salesforce listening to their customers when there's a good idea. So there's a new publisher action on groups, which I've tried to show there, that allows you to create an announcement as well as being able to post regular messages, post links, post polls. You can also create an announcement. Now, the announcement is displayed in a highlighted fashion on the group detail page. So that will appear, it's quite a pale yellow, but that will appear in yellow. Sits on the left-hand side of the group detail page, as well as appearing at the top of the group page on the Salesforce1 application. And it also appears as a regular post in the feed, but that has no stickiness. So that will, as further posts appear in the feed, that will then be pushed down. And the announcement includes an expiry date, after which it won't be displayed anymore. So that's the end of the chatter changes. So next up we have forecasting. So a couple of things to mention there. Firstly, customizable forecasting is no longer being developed by Salesforce. So instead, efforts are being focused on collaborative forecasting. It's important to note that customizable forecasting will still be supported. It's not like they're just dropping it, but there'll be no new features added to it because it's not. No one's going to be working on the development side of things anymore. And some additions to the forecasting functionality. Sales teams can now use up to 4 types of forecast. So that allows them to predict sales from multiple perspectives. So the available options are opportunities based on revenue, quantity, or both, opportunity splits based on revenue, and product families based on revenue, quantity, or both. And there's also been a couple of changes to forecast reporting. So forecasting managers can now filter forecasting items and forecasting quotas reports by forecast type. And a final change on the forecasting side of things is that managers can filter forecast reports so that they only display data from their direct reports as opposed to rolling up all the way through all their descendants in the hierarchy. So they can just be concerned with their immediate team rather than their immediate team's reports, etc. Okay, next we have orders. So this is a new feature introduced by this release. So orders are something that we've created custom versions of in the past, but they're now in Spring14 going to be supported natively by the platform. So an order is an agreement between a customer and a company to provision services or deliver a quantity of products at an agreed price on an agreed date. As I say, it's something we've implemented custom solutions for in the past, so we're quite pleased that that's now being picked up by the platform and it's less code for us to write. So orders are not enabled by default for existing systems. Any new systems commissioned after Spring14, they will be enabled by default, but for those who already have a system, your system administrator must enable this through the orders setting page. Orders follow the sharing model of the parent account. So users that have read access to an account also have read access to all orders associated with the account. And when orders are enabled, there are new object and user permissions that appear in profiles and need to be configured to control access to orders in much the same way that you would any other standard object. There's nothing particularly special about how you would configure those orders. There'll just be additional ones that you're probably not used to seeing up until now. Orders support reductions. So these are changes to orders that have been already fulfilled. Orders are first-class S objects, so they come with a set of standard list views, and you can also create your own custom list views should you so desire. And you can create reports on orders. So in terms of standard report types, when you're creating a report, you'd simply choose a type from the contract reports area that includes orders. But you can also create custom report types if the standard ones don't match your requirements. So next we have repeat tasks. So repeat tasks are an alternative to recurring tasks, with the main difference being that they aren't scheduled for a specific date. The repeat task is only created when it's needed, which is when the preceding task is due or completed. So it means you don't get great big long swathes of recurring tasks filling up your calendar going out into the distance. All you've got is the next task that's due. So that brings us to our first demo, and we'll try and take a look at this in our sandbox. Okay, so if I go to the BrightGen account, I scroll down and I create myself a task. I'm going to give that a recurrence interval of 7 days, and that means 7 days after this task is completes. In this case, it could be completes or it could be after the due date. But 7 days after this task is completed, I want to create a repeat task. So what will happen is, at the moment, when I save this, so what we'll see down here is I've only got a single activity, open activity. I've got no activity history of and I've only got the test repeat task in there. So if I now go and edit this task and complete it, and go back to the BrightGen account. So what's happened is that completed task has moved down into the activity history, and a new one has been created in the open activities section, which has a due date of 7 days after the complete date, which is today, the 5th of March, of my initial task. And this will continue quite happily until such time as we change the configuration. So if I complete this one again and save it, and then I go to the BrightGen account, I've now got 2 completed tasks and I've got another complete task in there. And that will continue until I turn off the recurrence aspect of this. Then if I save that, and if I go and edit it again and complete this task, go back to the BrightGen account, then you can see all of my activities are now complete. So there's no repeat task that was scheduled as part of that, because I'd marked it to say that I didn't want another scheduled task to be created. Okay, next up we have some enhancements to the analytics side of things. So Winter 14, Salesforce introduced a new API for external access to the system, which was the Analytics API. So this is now available for developers working on the Salesforce platform through the Apex programming language. So what this means is that you can execute a report and access the results directly from code, although not code that runs in triggers, because that would hold up the committing to the database. You can execute the report synchronously and wait for the results, or you can execute it asynchronously and then poll to get the results. Synchronous reports will finish more quickly, but there are limits on how many of these that may be run in a particular hour, how many results may be returned, and that kind of thing. So asynchronous is probably better with larger volumes of data. There are some additional limits and restrictions which are documented in the Apex Developers Guide. An example use case for this functionality might be some scheduled Apex that pulls down the report, converts it to a CSV file, and then emails that. I know that we've had a couple of our customers ask for that in the past. Again, we'll take a look at what this looks like on a page, if I can find the right page. Yeah, so what I've got here is my all opportunities report. So what this is doing is this is executing a report. So at the moment, my code has no idea what the format of the report is. So how many columns are in there, what type of report it is, the fact that it runs on the opportunity object, has no idea about any of that. All it knows is the idea of the report that it needs to run. So having executed that report, it then gets back a bunch of meta information about the report in terms of the number of rows, number of columns, etc. And then I can iterate the rows. So I can iterate, first off, I iterate the headings. Again, I don't know how many headings there are. I just walk through them, outputting them until there are no more. And then I can walk through the rows, and for each row, I walk through the columns. So what this means is I can have this report used in a programmatic fashion. So for example, generating a CSV file. However, it means that the query that's backing the CSV file isn't tied into my code. Someone can go and update the report, and the next time my code executes, it will pull down the different version of the columns or the heading that someone has configured into that. So it nicely decouples things. So we can see there being some interesting uses for that. Okay, there's also some enhancements to the reporting user interface. So you can now sort group levels independently, and you've also got floating headers available when viewing lengthy reports. It's going to be a lot easier for me to try and show you this than try and describe them. So let's take a look at those. So I've created a report called Group Docs, And what I've got here is I've got opportunities grouped by close date and stage. So as you can now see, it's possible for me for each of those groupings. That comes back. If I click on the close date, I can sort by close date ascending or descending, independently of sorting by the stage name ascending or the stage name of descending. So before, you never really had any control over that. It would just simply sort by ascending. So it would always show the kind of oldest information first. So we've now got real granular control over that. Now the sorting of the floating headers. So most reports, don't normally fit nicely onto a single page, especially if they've got various levels of grouping summary, because you've just got so many rows to be displayed. So what now happens when you scroll the headings off of the screen? You'll notice that there's a small arrow appears where my pointer has appeared there, and if I click on that, then that drops in the floating headers for me, so I can suddenly see again, okay, I'm into the close date is the 22nd of February, and the stage grouping is stage 3 of proposal sent. Now this will change as I scroll through, so it won't stick on the 27th of February in the proposal sent. If I scroll down further, which brings the next row into play, then suddenly the close date changes to the 28th of February and the stage changes to prospecting. So the floating header reacts to what is scrolling underneath it to make sure it's displaying appropriately for the context. Okay, next up we have some platform enhancements. So first up we have feed-based page layouts. So these allow you to put the chatter feed and record details into separate tabs on the page, so that your users don't have to scroll down through the entire feed every time they want to access some of the record information. Now, this isn't available for all S-objects. Currently, it's only for accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, and custom objects. So let's just take a quick look at a record that has the feed-based page layout enabled. So if I go to webinars, and this is something that you configure through the page layout to say whether you want it to be tabbed or non-tabbed. So the maximum level of granularity you'll be able to get is going to be on a per user profile. So the page layouts being specific to user profile and record type combinations. So you can't have it differently on a per user basis. As you can see here, my details tab purely contains my details, and the feed tab shows me all the feed information, of which there is nothing on this. But if there is a lot of information, then often you end up having to scroll down or remembering to hide the feed. If you're actually interested in both sides of it, it can be quite a nice way of switching between it. Something that may be useful if you've got quite a lot of activity in your chatter feed, and some people have no interest in that and purely want to get straight to the record details. Okay, next we have mass assignment of permission sets. So anyone that's used permission sets will know that currently, having created a permission set, you then need to go to each user's record, scroll down to the bottom of the user's record, find the permission sets section, click on, I think it was add, remove, or manage, or something like that, and then have a list of available permission sets and a list of the permission sets that are assigned to them. So it's a fairly slow and cumbersome process to assign it, especially when you sort of got into more than about 10 users. You could spend quite a lot of time doing that. And it also becomes a bit error prone. So if you've got a list of users, it's very easy to, got a list of 100 users, it's very easy to miss out one or two of them. So the new functionality allows you to add or remove a permission set from a number of users in a single operation. When you assign a permission set, it will only complete the operation for valid users. So, for example, you can't assign a permission set giving access to a custom object to a chatter-free user because they have no record access. So in that case, the operation would fail. However, where the operation fails, a message will be displayed giving the reason against that particular user. So it's not an all or nothing. They don't have to all succeed. You can have individual failures and successes as part of the same operation. And this is limited to 1,000 users in a single operation, which I think for many customers of Salesforce is probably going to be sufficient. So let's take a quick look at what this looks like. So We have our obligatory siren go past, as always part of the webinar. So here I have a permission set called test, which actually doesn't do anything at all, just purely there for the purposes of demonstrating this. So if I now click on manage assignments, so basically no one's assigned to it at the moment, so remove assignments is grayed out, and then I can choose to add assignments. And what this allows me to do is then pick any existing list view that's been defined for the users. So I'm doing it for all active users, even though I know I've got users that it's going to fail on. So I've got a chatter moderator user, I've got a chatter external user. So I know these people aren't going to be able to have this permission set assigned to them. And I'm going to tick everyone anyway. And then if I click on assign, so that then gives me a message to tell me that 14 users failed and 11 users were successful. And as we can see here, where I can't assign it to someone, it gives me the reason why. So the user license doesn't match this, but there may be other restrictions as well. So having done that, I can then tick any number of these people that have already got the permission set assigned to them, and I can then just simply remove the assignment en masse. And that will then tell me that that's been successfully removed. I'm just going to go ahead and remove it from everybody else because this is our sandbox and people might get confused. Okay, so that's mass assignment of permission sets. And finally, on the platform, this is a bit more aimed at developers rather than administrators or business users of the system. So bear with us for this one slide. So this is a solution to a problem that has vexed Salesforce developers for a number of years, auto numbers in tests. So to give a bit of background for those who aren't familiar with them, auto numbers are custom fields that automatically increment each time a record is created, effectively giving a unique identifier to each record. Now, a lot of the time you want those to be contiguous. You don't want any gaps in there. You want each time a record is created for it to get the next available auto number. Now, unfortunately, unit tests consume auto numbers. So if you have a unit test which creates 50 test records, then at the end of the test, you'll have a gap of 50 in your auto number because those are consumed rather than being rolled back as part of the test process. Now, Spring14 introduces a new independent auto number sequence option on the Apex test execution menu, and that stops unit tests consuming auto numbers. So if that's something that has been plaguing your developers, there is a solution to it. However, note this is not a silver bullet. It's still possible to get gaps in an auto number sequence because auto numbers are consumed whenever a record is attempted to be created in the main system, as long as the transaction that attempted to create that completes. Even if the record doesn't get created, the auto number has already been used up by the time that record fails, so that one's gone. So if, for example, you've got a trigger that's processing a bunch of records that have been loaded in batch, it's processing 200 at a time, and 5 of those records fail, each of those records will still have consumed an auto number. So there will be effectively gaps in the auto number sequence of records that didn't make it as part of that transaction. Okay, so as usual, this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the highlights of the release that we believe are of interest. There's obviously other changes that we haven't covered today. So if you'd like more information on this, then head over to the Spring14 release portal at the short link shown, where you can find the release notes. 330 plus pages of them this time, so make sure you've got a bit of spare time if you're planning on reading through those. There's additional documentation, there's feature videos, training videos and collateral, and plenty more there as well. So that brings us to the end of the Spring14 release highlights. So now moving on to our final topic, the Elevate workshop in London. So Elevate is a free one-day event being put on by Salesforce and the wider community. It's taking place on March 21st at Royal Mint Court. It's focused on developers. As I say, it's free. All you need to bring is, all your developers need to bring is a laptop and a bag to take home the workbooks that will be available. So there's 3 different tracks depending on the level of experience, beginner, advanced and mobile. So beginner is aimed at those that have no Force.com development experience but would like to learn about it. So that's the clicks not code style of development. So this would be suitable for people new to Salesforce in general or more from an administrator background. Then we have the advanced track, which is more around coding extensions to Salesforce using Apex, Visualforce, Canvas applications. And then we have the mobile track, which is for those who are already comfortable developing in Apex and Visualforce and want to learn how to build installable mobile applications. So this won't be building mobile applications that are surfaced inside Salesforce1, but this is more about building your own kind of completely custom mobile applications that get installed on a device with your own branding, etc. And I'll be co-presenting the mobile track, and you can learn more about this event and sign up for it at the short link shown there. Okay, so now we move on to questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Keir. So first of all, there's a question here. Are there any plans for a BlackBerry version of Salesforce 1?
Not as far as I know, no. Salesforce, the Salesforce stance on this, because we've asked about BlackBerry, we've asked about Windows Mobile, so obviously iOS and Android aren't the only mobile technologies, but the Salesforce stance on this is that iOS and Android are the ones they're seeing demand for at the moment, so that's what they're focusing on. So for BlackBerry users, the option for them would be the HTML5 version of the application, accessing that through the native device browser.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question here from one of our viewers. Thank you very much. When you use printable view for a summary report, the summed amounts don't show on the same row as the group, so it makes it very difficult to manipulate the data. Are there any enhancements for this?
So I'm not aware of any enhancements in this release for this. However, you do have the kind of sledgehammer option of using the analytics API in Apex to actually generate a Visualforce page with everything laid out exactly as you need it laid out. So no, I'm not aware of anything on the regular configuration, but we will check into that and we will come back to you on that just to make sure. We'll also have a look and see if there's anything planned as far as we know in the next release to help with this.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, we have a question here that says, can you change the order to feed-centric changes?
Oh, so the feed-centric pages. No, you can't change the order. So the feed will always appear as the first tab, and the record will always appear at the second tab. However, what does happen is the platform remembers, or the application remembers, the last tab that you were on. So if you're on the record view for a particular record rather than the feed view, next time you access it, it won't drop you back into the feed view. It will take you to the record view where you were. So it shouldn't. You won't be forced to navigate to the feed view and then flip over each time.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, there's a couple of questions, some new questions coming in. Will the training day be repeated in the future?
This is the Elevate workshop, I'm assuming. The honest answer is I don't know. It's taken a few months to put this one together. Now, I know they have in other parts of the world, so certainly in San Francisco, I think they're on their second or third Elevate workshop. But I do believe that there is a plan to host others around the UK. So the last I heard, there has been one in Bristol, which took place last year, which was prior to Salesforce 1, so the content would be different. And there is talk of hosting one in Birmingham later in the year as well. So I would imagine there'll be an attempt to do more of these around the UK, but I don't know whether they will actually be repeated in London at any point in time.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question just come in. Can any user post announcements in chatter groups?
No, you have to be. You have to have a particular permission on the chatter group. You have to be the owner, I believe, or the moderator of or the manager of the group. So yeah, you can't just have everyone kind of throwing announcements in there at the same time.
Okay. So there's no further questions. So I'd just like to say thank you ever so much for joining us today. I hope this session's been of use to you. If you've got any further questions as a result of having seen this, but think of them after we've finished, by all means send them to me, Clive Platt at BrightGen.com, and I'll make sure that Keir answers them for you. And I'll, of course, be sending out the slide deck and the YouTube video link as per usual, so you better rerun any part of the session that you want. Thanks once again for attending, and hope to see you at our next one, whenever that is.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.